Is the BCS Foundation exam difficult? No, but it's not easy either. Let me explain what I mean. The exam is 40 questions, it's 60 minutes, and you have to get 26 questions right. That's 65%. All you have to do is choose the correct answer from four options 26 times, and you've passed the exam. Now, on paper, that sounds quite manageable, and it is. But here's where a lot of people mess up. The questions on the exam aren't simple definition. They're not going to ask you to define what the M in Moscow, for example, stands for. That would be too easy. What they're going to do is give you a scenario where stakeholders are debating what feature to deliver first. And then they're going to ask you in the question, what would be the best technique to apply here? Now, if you've just memorized that Moscow stands for must, should, could, won't, you're not even going to realize that it's a Moscow question because they don't use the word Moscow in the question. They're describing it and expecting you to, given the context, be able to apply it. And that's the gap. That's the bit that really catches people out. And it's the difference between knowing a definition and hearing a scenario and being able to understand the technique that is being described or needs to be applied for the specific scenario. So just to put it into perspective for you, the BCS say the time it takes to be prepared for this exam is 30 hours. So 18 hours of guided learning, 11 hours of independent study, followed by the 60-minute exam. Now, compare that to something like Prince 2 or some other certifications, which take months to do. It's a pretty decent amount of time. It's manageable. It's 30 hours. If you did an hour a day for a month, you would be ready in a month. Cut that in half if you're doing 2 hours a day. And that's the way BCS specifically have designed it with no prerequisites. It's an easy entry point for people that do not have a technical background to break into tech and not feel overwhelmed by what they need to do to get their foot on the ladder. It's meant to be accessible, is what I'm saying. Now I'm going to tell you what makes it tricky because it's not really the content. If you've read the textbook cover to cover and you know it inside out, you're not really going to struggle with understanding some of these concepts rather. It's quite straightforward. Where people go wrong or what catches people out is when they're in the exam, when they're doing the exam and they realize, okay, I've got to read this scenario top to bottom, maybe a few times, and pick the right answer from four, all within 90 seconds. 60-minute exam and they're 40 questions. So you've got 90 seconds to figure it out. And that's what catches people out. So you're reading a scenario, which is like 4 lines. You've got to read the potential answers, identify which ones are wrong, and deduce your answer all within 90 seconds. And you can only do that, or you can only do it effectively if you have been practicing under timed conditions. There's no benefit in knowing the correct answers, but not being able to deduce it in time or getting flustered and ultimately answering the question incorrectly. The second thing that makes it difficult is similar sounding answers. Now, there are no trick questions in the exam. It's not an exam that tries to trip you up that way. But you might have a question about stakeholder analysis, and the answers might be between a RACI chart and a power interest grid. Now, both of these are used for stakeholder analysis, but it's having the knowledge to distinguish between the two, not just a random guess, not, oh, this is stakeholder analysis, so it's probably this one. It's having the wherewithal, the knowledge to know the difference between these two, although they seem very similar, what makes this answer right and what excludes this one completely. A lot of times, 3 or 4 questions like this, where you're just guessing, could be the difference between passing and failing the exam. Now, the third thing is the weighting, because not every question in the exam or not every group of questions are weighted the same. So I'm going to go through them now. I've got them up here. So section 5, investigating the business situation, that's 12.5% of the exam. So about 5 questions. Section 7, improving business processes, that's another 12.5%. stakeholder analysis and requirements, 10%. So these 4 areas alone account for nearly half of the exam. This is where people go wrong because they're looking at it holistically. They're trying to spend the exact amount of time on each topic area. So, for example, BA competencies is 2.5, 1 question. So, if you're spending the same amount of time on that you are on stakeholder analysis, which is 4 questions, then that's not smart. That's not going to work for you. The people who I found find the exam difficult are usually the ones who have revised everything, but revised everything equally. And all things aren't equal here. So, is the exam difficult? If you've read the textbook like it's a novel, if you've not done any timed practice, if you've just memorized a bunch of definitions, you're going to go into that exam and you're going to struggle. But if you're studying aligned to the syllabus, if you're giving more attention to those areas which are weighted more heavily, and most importantly, if you are practicing how to distinguish these answers under timed conditions, there's a very good chance you're going to pass this exam. What no one tells you about the foundation exam is it's not really that difficult. Ideas like pestle and Moscow and stakeholder analysis, they're logical frameworks that aren't that difficult to understand. The difficulty comes in being able to recognize these concepts when given a scenario under timed conditions. If a question comes up when you're doing the exam and you're not able to quickly identify what they're talking about or understand the concept, you're going to spend, 2 minutes on one question. You have 3 or 4 of those where you're spending over the allotted time, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes doing a question. Very quickly, you're going to find you're struggling in the exam because you have less chance to answer or less time to answer those questions you would probably get right. You keep getting those quote unquote tricky questions and you've burned through half your time already. When I was studying for the exam, I had a full-time job. I just had my son was just born, so I had a newborn. And I'll be honest, I find it difficult? No, I found it fair. But that was because me and the textbook were like this. Me and the syllabus, all of the stuff I've mentioned previously, I was locked in. So all I had to do, the way I was looking at it was all I have to do is get 26 questions right and I've passed this exam. It's giving you the opportunity of even getting 14 questions wrong and still passing. So, all in all, is it difficult to pass? I wouldn't say difficult, no. I think the exam is not that difficult, but it all comes down to how you prepare. If you want to find out right now whether you'd pass or where the gaps are, you can go to bastack.com. I've got a completely free readiness quiz. It's 10 questions. It takes about 5 minutes and it quickly identifies what areas weighted to the syllabus you're strong in and what areas you could do a bit more practice in. So you can spend more time on those areas before you go in and actually book the exam. That's it for now. Thanks.